All my life long, I've looked at people who seem shiny and together and socially confident and balanced and normal. And I've always felt I'm not one of those. I'm a kind of strange creature who kind of exists on the periphery of things. I'm Charles Hazlewood. I'm Artistic Director of Paraorchestra, and I want to welcome you into this little womb-like space. It's like a kind of little score library, really, and where some of my most beloved musical instruments reside. Let's start with this one. This is a filicorda. It's rare to find one that's got double keyboard, double manual, and a pedal board. It's an absolutely beautiful instrument. And over here, Wurlitz's electric piano. Whirlies have got a fire to them and a kind of teeth-jangling, end-of-the-world urgency about them. I would take a Wurlitz over a Fender Rhodes any day of the week. This is the Hammond. This is the only instrument which is actually older than me. I suppose about midway through lockdown, I started thinking about death because my then wife was curating a festival of death and dying, exploring the issue that death is perhaps the last great taboo in our culture. We don't want to talk about it, we don't want to think about it, and yet it's the one reality that all of us will have to face. So much of the very greatest art concerns death. Melancholic music is the music that probably most of us go to, whatever our mood. It's what lifts us up, it's what makes us gain some sense of transcendence, right? This is Beethoven, yeah, he's just in turmoil. But in a way, that's where the genius lies. Let's see now, look, that's the beginning of the Fifth Symphony. Da, 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 da. Given that I was a child of the 80s, whenever the political regime is suitably grim, great culture emerges. These are the years of Thatcher. Unsurprisingly, a shit ton of really good music erupted, and most of the best of it, thoroughly melancholic in hue. And I was chatting with Brett Anderson, so I thought, how would it be if we did a death songbook, so-called? And I was like, well, let's do it. Let's do some kind of like delicate reimaginings of these songs, mainly of our youth, about death, the death of love, of loss, of anxiety, of heartbreak, despair. And so the project was born. We recorded it in peak lockdown time, and now it's a record, and we're going to put it on its feet on the road and coming to Manchester with it. The music industry has been in the dark ages about disabilities since whenever. And my youngest kid was born with cerebral palsy. 20% of the UK population identify as disabled. Right, it's a big minority. So I've been conducting orchestras for such a long time. Why is it that I virtually never, ever encounter a single musician in a 100-piece orchestra who has a disability? Why would you miss out on someone's talent because a certain person doesn't fit a standard mould? That makes no sense, it's a waste. So Paraorchestra is here to shine a big bright light on that issue and to celebrate all sorts of different people with all sorts of different gifts. Obviously the long game is not to create another 100% disabled orchestra, because that's just like creating another ghetto. We don't need ghettos, we need evolved mixes of human beings. And that's what Paraorchestra is now. People were all very much kind of like, oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But what you could smell, the half-formed thought at the back of the mind was, disabled orchestra, that actually won't be any good. I felt insulted actually, because I already had, profile and a good career. So I became like public enemy number one, really. There wasn't any door that I wasn't prepared to kick down. Bit by bit, the tide turned and people started to see it. But I think it's interesting that there were people who used to come to our gigs when we were just starting out. And these are lovely, kind people coming along because they wanted to support what they thought was an important thing. They weren't expecting, however, to have a bloody good time. So when they walked out at the end, skipped out at the end, having seen a rampantly good gig, that was worth more than anything. Often a musician who's disabled doesn't play a conventional instrument, they play assistive technology. So they're working via a digital portal. So then we're into an interesting terrain, aren't we? Because if you think about it, the orchestra, that thing that we all know and love, is a thing which very much represents the past. Been no new instruments that have joined since that time, even though electricity was invented and a whole spectrum of new musical possibilities, sonic possibility emerged since electricity was invented. Why hasn't the orchestra embraced that? Suddenly we're thinking, well, wow, if we can have that, we can have ranks of analog synthesizers. It's not a contradiction or indeed in any way paradoxical that I can do a psychedelic improvising gig one night and conductor appearing in an orchestra playing Mozart the next. Those two may seem to be from very different points in the musical compass, but they feed into each other. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a custodian of tradition, but if that is all you are, it's not interesting enough. I'm now with Paraorchestra, which is the first orchestra that I have been close to where I am allowed to do all of these things. I'm one of those strange people that if I sit down to work on an idea, I'll find every possible displacement activity to avoid doing any work on the idea. You know, I'll be actually cleaning the windows or something stupid like that. I can very regularly find myself hitting a brick wall and not feeling I've got any maneuverability left. You know, very often your idea is going in this direction and the person you're collaborating with, their idea is slightly going in that direction. There comes a point where they're no longer kind of swimming in parallel. Temporarily that feels really shit. And you're like, oh God, I'm not sure if this idea can carry weight at all anymore. But actually that kind of paralysis will always lead to a more interesting concept. I started singing in a choir age 5, which blew my tiny mind because, you know, singing in a choir is just like playing in an orchestra. No one's more important than everyone else, but everyone has value. In my mid-teens, my voice broke. So at that point, I thought, well, screw all of this. And then one day, I thought, I'm going to go to a choir rehearsal. And we were sitting there waiting for the music teacher to show up. So I kind of stomped down to the middle and started conducting. And in that moment, this enormous light bulb went on over my head. I thought, oh my God. But then the really remarkable thing was that out of nowhere, the organ just started to waft in underneath. And I realized that that music teacher had been hiding in the organ loft the whole time, waiting to see if I would do that. And it happened, and I have never looked back. And then I merged into the professional world. Suddenly all these big shiny orchestras around the world were like ringing out and saying, oh, you look interesting, we'll give you a go. I was in no way ready. I was so insecure, so unsure of myself. So I felt such imposter syndrome. It nearly killed me, and I realized that where I was going wrong was that I spent my whole time thinking, but I've got to conduct Beethoven better than anyone else. The shift in perception was to realize, actually it's not about being better, it's about, in a way, reinvesting in what's authentically yourself. And then I had this amazing opportunity to go, I was invited to go to South Africa. Everyone sings about everything all the time. This amazing, earthy, formidable South African company of singers completely got me back into the game, made me remember again why I have to make music. So I got with a big shiny agent, and it didn't take long for the relationship to become strained because they wanted someone who was just streamlined in doing that one thing. And the day that he sacked me, the managing director, he actually sacked me off the agency. He said, do you know what, we can't go any further with you. Do you know why? Because you're a maverick. Stop being a maverick and then you'll have a career. That was a piece of advice that I was like, I'm a maverick and I love it. When the pandemic started, I, like so many people, was kind of almost paralyzed with shock at the feeling of just being quietly in my studio every day. You know, I'd spent the previous 30 years airport hopping. I was just on tour the whole time. And so suddenly I'm sitting in my studio day after day and just drinking in the solitariness of it, the peace, the tranquility. And I realized I don't want to do that work anymore. I realized I now have a thing called Paraorchestra, which is the first orchestra in my life that is up for every challenge, that is hungry and curious for every new paradigm, that has got a voracious appetite for every kind of new direction of travel. Why carry on trying to bring about change rather than just being the change I want to see?